and Commercial Realtor of the Year. So we're so happy to have Brett here. He does a lot of multifamily. We had gone back and asked our panel, what questions do they get most of the time? So we'll go through that in the beginning. That might answer most of your questions. And then, you know, we'll open it up at the end to everyone else. But before we get started, I want to bring up David, our sponsor this morning with the food, and thank him and have him talk about his product.
Thank you, Moshe. Good morning, everyone. David Nordell with Farmers Insurance. We're a local agency here based out of Torrance, right over on Sky Park in Hawthorne, and we have over 35 years combined experience in the industry, so we really understand the complexities of completing a real estate transaction. And at the end of the day, no escrow should ever be delayed because of insurance. And right now in the industry, we are seeing some things that are popping up that are making it more difficult for individuals to get insurance on their purchases. Right now, what the insurance industry is doing is they're making a change where water claims will follow the property and not just the insured. So if you have a water claim on a property that the seller had within the past 3 years, it could have an impact on the buyer being able to get insurance, or for that matter, the amount that they're going to be paying for the insurance. So you want to be sure that you contact your agent or contact an agent and talk to them and have them pull up the property and check to see if there have been any water claims on it. And this applies to both personal lines and commercial. So Farmers is actually considered an industry leader in habitational commercial insurance. So this would be apartment buildings, condominium complexes, HOAs, planned unit developments, etc. And we have some very unique features about our policy, but I'd just like to share a quick story with you, because I recently was working with a client who we have his condo insured on the personal line side. And he was very upset with his current carrier. They were canceling him, and so he gave our agency a call. And in reviewing the policy, he sits on the HOA board as well. And in reviewing the commercial policy, I discovered that they did not have any coverage for what we call directors and officers liability. Now, if you're working with a client that is purchasing a condo or something like that, and they're looking to maybe be involved with an HOA board, you have got to be sure that they review their insurance with a professional. Because most people don't realize that by serving on an HOA board, if you make a decision that someone else doesn't agree with and it has an impact on them, you could be held personally liable for that claim. Okay, that means they could personally sue you. We're not just talking about the HOA. And so the directors and officers coverage is what would protect the directors and officers sitting on that board or the ones in the management position from any potential liability claim of that nature. And it was just astonishing to me that a 36-unit HOA complex would not have this coverage. You know, we're talking about an $8 million building. And if something were to happen and they weren't to have the proper coverage, the HOA board could have been sued. So it's just super critical that you work with a professional, and I highly encourage you, even if it's not me, to work with a farmer's agent when it comes to habitational, because again, there are some very unique features about our product that go above and beyond to help protect your clients in that transaction. So if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. My cards are in the back, and I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Moshe. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks for the food. Before we get started, just a couple of things. Make sure your phones are either off or on vibrate so we can continue, with our session. Also, tomorrow morning here, there is a probate class being offered. If you haven't signed up or if you're interested, you can go online as sable.org and sign up, or just sign up over here. Just wanted to get that passed on. With that said, let's get started. And I'm going to start with Jim Thompson here on this end, and we'll move forward. So Jim, the first question is, what's the most common problem you see with residential multifamily apartment owners?
I guess that's on. Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. By the way, thank you for having me back for, I believe, like Mo said, the fifth time. I can't imagine why you'd like to hear me for the fifth time. It gets boring after a while. The answer, we're here to talk about multifamily residential dwellings, apartments. Duplexes, fourplexes, and on up, residential rentals, essentially. And I deal with, I've been an attorney, landlord-tenant attorney since 1989. I've been a landlord since 2001. For 15 years, I sat as a part-time Superior Court judge on landlord-tenant cases and other types of cases. I've seen a lot, haven't seen it all, and if anything I say you disagree with, please let me know. I'm not arrogant enough to think that I know everything. I've been around for a little while. I know a lot, but not everything. The answer to the question is, the biggest problem I see with your clients buying residential income property is that they don't understand they're also buying a business. And during the transaction, which you are primarily focused on, yes, the property value, the appraisal, the escrow instructions and the contingencies and the loan and all that stuff, certainly. But the client has to understand that they're not just buying an investment. It's a good investment, clearly, they know that. It's not just, just an apartment, just a side thing. No, it's an active, highly regulated business. And most, especially the new apartment buyers, are not business owners. They have no frame of reference for owning and operating a business. It's a totally different mentality being a business owner, whole different risk, especially in being a landlord in California, and especially if you're buying in Los Angeles, Santa Monica, West Hollywood, the rent-controlled areas. So not understanding that I'm buying a business, I'm going to be a business owner, a business operator. If they want to, if they want to buy an investment, residential income property, which is a great investment, and they don't want to operate it, that's what property management companies are for. And either if you choose to own and operate your own business, be your own landlord, be your own property manager, then you have to take the time to learn the business. It's just like you or I, I'm going to go open up a 7-Eleven. Well, first of all, 7-Eleven wouldn't give me a franchise because I have no experience in it. Okay, but let's say I buy rent a storefront property. I'm going to open up a store. I will quickly go out of business because I have no concept about sales tax and inventory control and all that stuff. Landlords, new landlords especially, even some experienced landlords, have not kept up on the law. The laws change every year. Every year. So what I have constantly, monthly, the clients come to me and I've been doing this way for 20 years. I've been a landlord for 20 years. Yeah, but do you think the laws have changed a little bit in 20 years? Yeah, a lot. And you have to keep up on it. It's like hitting a moving target. It's difficult for me to keep up on the changes in, especially rent control laws, and because there's 3 different jurisdictions in Southern California that I have to deal with, and the state laws, they're changing all the time. And they're rarely changing in favor of the business owner. And that's a problem. So if there's I tell my clients, my landlords and property managers, about 85% of every decision, every problem you have, there's a law that says how to do it. Landlord shall, property manager shall, landlord. All right? And another 13%, there's real estate rules, and I explain the difference between laws, which are statutes, ordinances, the government saying this is the way you're going to do it. And the rules, which I equate to what professional property managers, professional landlords have learned. This is the way these things are done in this business because it works this way best. And I tell my clients about 3 decisions out of 100, only 3% at most, do you get to do it the way you want to. So when I say it's a highly regulated business, it's highly regulated, lots of law on this. It's not complicated law, I don't think, but there's a lot of it. And landlords have to have understand a concept that it's a business I'm owning, and it's a highly regulated business, and I need to have a fundamental working knowledge of the laws and the rules, and if you do, it's not that hard, and you'll be profitable.
Thank you, Jim. Lee, talk to us about how much down payment do I need to buy a multifamily, say 5 or more, please.
A lot. There's gray area in this question. Technically, with the banks and the lending, the rule is they'll allow 20 to 25% down if the property cash flow will qualify for it. But in this market, it doesn't work that way because some of the areas have lower cap rates. So the answer is really between 35 and 50% down. And that also depends on if it's rent control or non-rent control. And I have deals where my clients are buying non-rent control buildings and the rents are 20, 30, 40, 50% below market. And the catch-22 is they got to put 50% down to close it. Then they get rents up, and we either refi again, or we do a loan called an additional advance where it's preset. They put 50% down, and they have X amount of time to raise rents, and then they get the earn-out piece, the additional advance. So it takes between 35 and 50% down to buy buildings 5 units and up, different than the 1 to 4.
Thanks. Michael, a lot of people are unfamiliar with really property management, so we're going to get a little more deeper with you, please. Talk about your expertise, your background in property management, and then as a property manager, what associations you belong to, please.
Yeah, it's weird that people want a qualified manager, somebody who knows what they're doing, kind of what Jim was talking about. He's so spot on in so many of the things he was saying about the laws and the things we have to keep up on. And I've been doing this for over 25 years, and laws, like he said, they change yearly. I belong to the Apartment Association, California Southern Cities. I belong to several of them, but I'm on the board at that particular association where we have and work closely with lobbyists. We have our own committees for legal, local, and state ledge, and as well as federal. And it's really hard to keep up with all the stuff coming down the pipe. We work alongside with a lot of the realtors, lobbyists as well, killing bills and trying to push other ones through. And there is just a ton of that. So I, myself, and my team, it's mandatory that we constantly take classes, constantly get filled in. One of the biggest pitfalls that I see with people managing their own properties is they don't understand fair housing. There's that 80-20 rule. I'm sure you guys have all heard of in so many different things. And to me, understanding fair housing is part of the 80%. That'll get you very, very far. It won't get you everywhere, but there's so many things that people don't understand the difference between discrimination and other forms of what people think is discrimination, and they just confuse it and they screw themselves up when they do that. Besides that, you have to know how to get apartments leased, get apartments turned, get them rehabbed on time. There's so much that we take care of. You know, I always tell people that when we take control of your building, all you need to do is read your reports and collect a check when there's money available. Other than that, we take care of everything from the roof to the foundation and everything outside of that. We do it all. And you have to have a lot of good people in place, experts that know what they're doing on all these facets. And it takes a good property management team in order to make that all happen.
Thanks, Michael. Brett, let's talk about cap rates and GRMs. Tell us, what do they mean, please?
Sure. So they're both a financial metric that people will use to evaluate a deal. And in one sense, it gives you the ability to compare that investment to other investments. They're both used, I would say, on the smaller apartment buildings. I would say that the gross rent multiplier is used more frequently. And just, I don't know if you to explain what a gross rent multiplier is, it's simply the income that a property produces, how many times you'd have to multiply that to get to the purchase price. So what's unique about the GRM is that it doesn't take expenses into consideration. So that's why it's used a lot of times on smaller apartment buildings where a lot of mom and pop or different users have different expenses. So that's why it's used on the smaller apartment buildings. When you get into a higher class of investment properties, the cap rate's used. And simply spoken, a cap rate is what the return would be on a property with no debt. But it uses the net operating income, which takes expenses into consideration. So they're both important. I would say that the simpler of the two is the gross rent multiplier, which is used more frequently in the smaller apartment buildings that we'd be looking at. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Brett.
Yep.
Back to Jim. So here I am as a buyer, and I'm in escrow to buy a multifamily property. What documents should I be looking for? What should I be inspecting, please?
Okay, what I'm focusing on is the rare ones for income property, for rentals. You all know, the escrow instructions and the appraisal, and we've talked about all that stuff. The things that I think in addition to that that are real important, and one I think you are familiar with, is the estoppel certificate. It's real important. Well, let's get to the documents. First of all, just for the business. I'm focusing on the business, not the transaction. That buyer needs to look and get in it during escrow all the leases, all the rental contracts. This business is based on the contract. The contract is everything. That's your business. The The tenants don't pay rent because they think it's a good idea or because they're good people or they're nice or that they're supposed to pay some money to where they live. They pay because they have a lawfully binding contract that mandates they pay them, okay? So that contract controls the tenancy, controls the tenant's conduct, and also a good contract, like the CAR one, I think it's very good, and I do recommend it. There's several other ones that are out there very good, but the CAR is laid out real good. And it's a primer on how to be a landlord, just the basic fundamentals, how to be a good landlord. It's also how to live normal for the tenant. One of the second biggest problem I see is landlords not reading their own contracts. So the first thing, you want to get those contracts and study them, because you're buying the business. Those contracts are personal property. Those better be 12 pages. You know, a two-pager, no. It's obviously no good. It's inadequate at best. The contracts have inherent property value, depending on how much rent that contract says the tenant has to pay. So those contracts can be sold. Nobody does it. Nobody buys the right to collect rent, but it is a business. You can buy the business and keep the real estate, okay? So the contracts, the leases. The estoppel certificates are usually given by the seller's agent to the tenants to sign that updates the contract from the tenant's perspective, and the estoppel certificate stops the tenant from denying what is in that. In other words, here's the people that are currently living in here. Here's the current rent. Yes, I do live here. These things, and it just updates the contract from the tenant's perspective. Sometimes sellers will give you, here's the contracts, and they're really good and all that stuff. Here's the people. But the contracts change. They better be changing. The rents, at the very least, should be going up somewhat. People do move in and move out. There are amendments. So the estoppel certificate, in addition to the leases, should give the buyer of these businesses a good idea of what each individual apartment is doing. Each individual door, each individual contract is its own mini business. So if you're buying a 12-unit, you're buying 12 businesses. Not just buying a building with a bunch of tenants, no. Because the contracts can be different. You want to look at those. In rent control, oh my goodness, this is a big problem I see. And this is for you guys especially. If you're selling rent control property, that buyer must have in advance a copy of the seller's current statement of registration. Statement of registration is rent control. The city says you're okay to be a rent control landlord. It's what it is, and you pay money for it every year. That's just the least of it. But if I've seen so many clients come to me, they close escrow, and I said, "Where's your 2017, 2016 statement of registration?" They go, "I'm going, oh goodness." It's like, "Where's your driver's license?" No, you cannot operate a rent control building without a statement of registration. Those are the documents that, from a business perspective, when you're buying the business, at the very least, you want to look at. You also want to look at, of course, the operating expenses, the utilities. You don't need the taxes because you know the tax is going to be based upon your purchase price. But utilities, maintenance, past history, and of course, you always want to have a building inspection. And that's not an appraisal. Appraisal is just the value of the property for the lender's purposes. A building inspection, I want to know the condition of that roof, the age, whether it's up to code, what improvements have been made, what is deficient. I want to know every little thing about that building before I buy it, because I want to know the problems with it. Okay? I want to know if it's a good deal I'm getting. It looks okay from the outside. You get a quality building inspector, and he gives you a half-inch inspection report in detail about everything aspect about that building. You want to know the health of the building, the age, so you can budget for it. So those are some things that I think that are not done enough. And you have to give them a estoppel certificate. You have to give them the contracts and have them in your escrow instructions. It has time for them to look at it, because if they don't like it, you can come back to the seller and say, well, fix this in non-rent control. Get the tenant to do this or amend this contract this way. Get me an estoppel certificate. If the tenant's not giving you an estoppel certificate, that's a problem tenant that you're buying. Okay, I want to know the problems. And if escrow should not, be held up because, one last thing, escrow should not be held up because the buyer wants the place empty. Okay, it does not need to be. Now, many buyers will not close. I absolutely will not close escrow until this is empty. Does not need to. Okay, if that's a condition that the buyer wants, you can put it in escrow that, okay, I want a place empty, so start the eviction seller, and then you can buy that when you do the transaction, the buyer steps in the shoes of the seller and buys the lawsuit also. Lawsuit is personal property. You're selling the land, the building, and all the personal property. The contract's number one, personal property. If there's any pending evictions or pending lawsuits, he's buying those too.
Thank you, Jim. Do me a favor, give me a chance to go through these, and I'll give everybody a chance for questions, please. Lee, let's talk about the debt coverage ratio. What does it mean? How does it affect the buyer?
Okay. Debt coverage ratio is similar to what a personal debt ratio would be on a residential loan, whereas the math is they figure out you make $10,000 a month, and your mortgage payment, tax, and insurance can't be more than maybe 33 to 38%. In commercial real estate, we have a debt coverage ratio, whereas for every dollar of mortgage debt, they'll want to see $1.15, $1.20, $1.25 of net income. So there's cash flow. So it applies as follows. You have your gross scheduled income, less your vacancy allowance, less your operating expenses, real expenses with management, reserves, and right maintenance and so forth, new taxes, right insurance. And then you have your net operating income. And if that's $100,000 and the lender wanted a 115 or whatever debt coverage ratio, then you divide that by the 100,000 and you have about $85,000 allowed for your debt service. So you take your debt service, you back it into your interest rate, and then that tells you how much that property qualifies for financing. You know, if they're qualifying the rates at 3.8, 3.9, or 4, that's going to qualify for more than if they're qualifying the rates at 5 and 6. So if interest rates go up, it changes the whole game for how much money you can borrow on a property. So bottom line is, if you hear the word 115 debt coverage ratio, 120, which is the given in the market, every $1 of mortgage, there needs to be $1.15, $1.20 of net income to support that.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Michael, talk about, as a property manager, what are your fees? How do you charge? Give us a breakdown, please.
Really good question. Everybody's always concerned about the percent. What percent do you charge? That always depends. You know, I'm not real concerned with the percentage as I am as what the dollar amount that percentage is bringing in. There's so many different ways to look at this and to charge from, and a lot of people who aren't close with the property manager often give wrong information to their clients. And it's important to know that there is a big distinction. 5%, that's the going rate. That's what a lot of people say, and sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not, though. If you've got a rent control building in Silver Lake where everybody's been there for 30 years and paying $500 rent in an 8-unit building, I'm not going to charge you 5%. That's not worth even talking to somebody about. It's not worth the time. On the flip side of that, if you've got, 8 units of oceanfront, $4,500 a unit or more, 5% is going to be a huge turnoff to somebody if I tell them that, for that little. So it depends. And what I'm finding out now, too, with what we're doing in Long Beach, we have so many repositioning properties that we're doing, kicking everybody out, then there's no income coming in. So I'm putting minimums on them. So there's a lot of things that go into that, and it, like Jim said earlier, you got to read the leases. What is that lease coming in? If we can't change the terms like rent control, we can't change that rent, I'm going to have to charge a higher percent. It might be 8, 10% on some of those. Whereas some of the other buildings where the rents are really high, I might charge 4%, 3%, or just a flat fee. So it really depends, and you want to make sure that we still have income coming in when we empty a building out too. So, the minimums come in handy then as well. As far as other fees, there's usually any property management company that uses a software, they usually pass that cost through, and which is typically not expensive at all. Some of them are $1 a unit per month, and others are, $12 a unit per month, depending on what system they're using. But it typically isn't a lot of money. Other than that, everything else is maintenance. And because we have our own construction team, we build our prices into the contracts that we use, but we use other vendors too, and they decide their own pricing. So those are all things that you want to make sure are worked out in the agreement as well.
Thank you, Michael. Brett, Let's talk about seller motivation. Why would somebody want to sell, a multi-unit property?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. So this comes up, I guess you can look at this from both sides. When you're looking to represent a seller, understanding their motivation and their goals is important to help them achieve whatever they want to achieve. But this is a question that you get as an agent a lot of times from a buyer or a buyer's agent. And I think it's typically probing to see, well, first of all, to understand what their investment goals are, because it could affect what kind of timing they'd want to put into a purchase agreement. Maybe it's a question to figure out, if there's room in the price or not. But that's a typical question that a buyer or buyer's agent may ask you. And I think a lot of times, I think that they're really asking if the seller is going to be involved in a 1031 exchange, and if they are, how to make it time right, I guess, is part of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brett. Jim, so here I am, a brand new landlord of a new residential income property. How should I communicate with my tenants?
All right. This is maybe the third most important thing that I see with landlords. Oh, Lordy. Landlords get themselves, 80% of my business is landlord-tenant, and 80% of those cases that I get, the lawsuits that I have to initiate, did not have to happen almost every day of the week. I get a new case in, and this didn't need to happen. Okay, well, that's my job as a lawyer. I'm going to dig you out of your hole. Most of the time, it's what's causing the problem is the landlord, and communicating with the tenant in the wrong manner. This is a business, and it's a high-risk business. You say the wrong thing, you're getting sued, and you do the wrong thing. You don't know the law. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Lack of knowledge is comfort. All those things really apply here. You've heard tenants say, I'll sue you and end up owning this building. If you have a rent control building and you don't know what you're doing, that tenant probably will be right. Okay, it's real important. I'm sorry, I lost track, got off track. What was the question again? Sorry.
I'm a new landlord, so how should I communicate?
Yes, communicating. The law really controls this. Okay, can you call your tenant? Yeah, you can call them. Can you talk to them face to face? Yeah, you can. But the general state law is the landlords have to provide all their tenants quiet use and enjoyment. If the landlord's talking to the tenant, put yourself in the tenant's perspective, it's usually not very quiet, and it's not quiet because you're talking to him, and it's not enjoyable. So are you technically violating law just by talking to them? Yeah, but that's not the issue. With rational tenants, normal tenants, good tenants, you tell them a problem. If by some chance they're great people of honor and great character, maybe it'll work. Most of the time it doesn't work, just wastes the time, irritates the tenant, and you're harassing me. Okay, that's what the tenant's perspective is. The law really controls how you communicate with the tenant. I say this for sure. And some attorneys will give you slightly different advice, but from 20-something years of experience, I recommend the following. Never write letters to a tenant. Never write letters to a tenant. Never email a tenant. Do not text tenants. Okay? And don't fax stuff to tenants. Well, see, I can't write letters. I can't email. I can't text. I can't fax. How am I going to communicate with the tenant? How can I got a problem. I need to interact with my tenant. Yes, you do. And yes, the law requires you to. You can call them, yeah. Okay, but will it work? Depend on the tenant and the quality of the property. What should you do? For every problem you have, there's a notice. And the law says landlord shall take the rent. Biggest problem, tenants not paying rent on time. California Code of Civil Procedure 1161, subparagraph 2. Landlord shall prepare and serve a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. Most of you know that. So the rent's not being paid. I'm not going to call my tenant and say, hey, you didn't, well, for the really good tenants that have paid on time and maybe got married and went on their honeymoon, forgot to pay the rent, I'll give them a call. But is that going to work? Well, maybe, but I follow the law. I prepare and serve a 3-day notice to pay rent and quit. Why? Because the law says so. If there's something else going wrong, the tenant's doing something they're not supposed to do, or they're not doing something they're supposed to do, it better be in your contract. Again, the lease, the rental agreement is everything. And the laws, if there's something else other than rent going on, late payment of rent, they got 10 dogs, they're moving in people, they're beating the place up, they're partying, in your contract, it's in there. And the law says, California Code of Civil Procedure 1161, subparagraph 3 says, landlord shall prepare and serve a 3-day notice to perform or quit. Okay? and your contract says this, you're doing this, you got 3 days to stop it, otherwise we'll evict you. And that may seem harsh, but it's following the law, and it's effective. Okay, letters take time. Texting is pretty fast, but it still takes time. Does it work? Most of the time, not. At the very least, you're wasting your time, and it takes effort. Many times, writing letters, texting, emailing, all that stuff is counterproductive. You want them to do something, the tenant looks at it and goes, I'm not doing that. And there's nothing, and the smart tenants know, I don't have to do a doggone thing this landlord wants until they serve me the right notice. Don't think your tenants don't know this. Okay, so it's a sign of weakness from the tenants. So you're like, oh, here's a landlord who doesn't know what he's doing. I'm in control of my landlord. Well, that's not the way it's supposed to go. And it gets worse from there. If you write letters, it's gee, would you please? It's, letters are for you. I'm on vacation. Mom, how are you? Wish you were here. Miss you. See you when you get back. That's letters. And letters in other businesses are fine. Letters from lawyers in other businesses, I do them all the time, and they do work. I have clients asking me, not property manager, but landlord tenant, mom and pop landlords, will you write a letter? No. Why? Well, because the law controls this. We'll do the right notice. Letters might work, but it's still, even for me, it's not the way this business is run. You serve the right notice. For every problem, there's a notice. I need to get in. California Code of Civil Procedure, California Civil Code, 1954. Landlord shall prepare and serve a. Talk about that in a little bit. There's for everything you have. And the law says landlord shall. So, I don't know, maybe you should follow the law. If you, even if it's true and honest and accurate, use that, and I see it doesn't just tenants alone without a loan against you in an eviction. They'll say, well, I took what you said all the time. And that was with a perfect letter. And God help you, landlord or property manager, and you write a letter and you say something, I know what you meant to say, but it sure came out wrong and it's slanderous, and in this case, libelous, and you're getting sued. Okay? So letters, texting, email, it's not following the law. They take more time. They're a sign of weakness. They're ineffective. They are used as a shield against you. I've had about 3 months ago, I had a tenant come in and read to the judge for about an hour and a half, 4 months worth of emails back and forth between the property manager and the tenant. I said, what is this manager doing all her life? Texting? I mean, for an hour and a half, this tenant sat there and read every single email, or text rather, that manager had sent him. And the judge has to look, after about 2 minutes, the judge is looking at me, glaring at me like, Thompson, what are you bringing me here? Aren't you counseling your clients? You don't do this. Now I have to sit here and listen to everyone because I don't know if it's relevant or not. An hour and a half, and I look back at the manager because I told her, don't do this. And she's in tears. I said, yeah. Fortunately, not one of them hurt us. But all it needs is one to kill us. So they're high risk, and you don't want to. So the notices, it's following the law. 2, it's not I'm playing around with you. It's you got 3. Here's the breach of contract. Here's the violation of law. You got 3 days to fix it, or we're going to evict you. And it works. And they're hard to mess up. They're all informed. Okay, CAR has the 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. It's good. AOA has them. They're all informed. So all you got to do is fill in the blank. They don't take work, and they're user-friendly. You don't need to be a lawyer or even a professional property manager to fill in these notices. But you got to fill them in right, and you got to serve them right. So basically, to communicate with your tenant, follow the law. It does take a little extra effort to prepare and serve the right notice, but they're effective, they're safe, they work, and properly filled out, they're effective in an eviction. And even if you mess up on them, it's really hard to make these notices slanderous. So there's every reason not to text, email, fax, write letters and notes, and every reason to do the proper notice in communicating with your tenant.
Thank you, Jim. Lee, let's talk about, so I want to get a loan for this new property I'm buying. Can I get a 30-year fixed rate for this multifamily?
Yes, except here's the catch. It needs to be an agency loan from like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. It's going to come with enormous prepay, and the rates are going to be in the 5s. What that will do compared to rates in the high 3s and low 4s, what it will do to the cash flow of the deal is make it not make sense. And the other catches with those fixed rate loans from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac is the loan amounts are usually $1 million or $2 million minimum. So that's not really out there. The market is more 5-year fixed, 7-year fixed, 10-year fixed, hybrids, fixed for 5, 7, 10. Then after that period, rolls to adjustables.
Thank you, Lee. Michael, back to property management. So why should I use your maintenance or construction department versus if I have some of my own vendors or other vendors from outside?
So with all of our, is this thing off? Hello. Back on. With all of our vendors that we use, we have a very onerous vendor agreement that we use, force them to show proof of insurance and additional insured and things like that. But the in-house maintenance that we use is put there for the client. For instance, our rates are usually way less than you going out and hiring a vendor somewhere. You know, if you go an electrician, I know some that charge $90 an hour, some that charge $125 and upwards, whereas our electrical may only be $67 an hour, something like that, 65. Same with plumbers too. You know, their rates are 85 to 130, and we're charging, you know, 55, 57 for people, and we're a licensed contractor as well. And we do that as a service for several reasons. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're a one-stop shop, and we also want to have the added control of an employee versus a vendor, where as you call a vendor at 3 a.m., they may not show up to something that's a real emergency. You have a little more control with people who are on your staff who are already set to be on call, and you control their job at that point, so you have way more flexibility when emergencies arise. And with the pricing for an electrician to go out at 3 a.m. is going to be much different than our pricing when we send our technicians out at 3 a.m.
Thanks, Michael. Brett, regarding the prices in the South Bay, when you go to, you know, write an offer for a client, do you see a lot of wiggle room in prices these days?
I would say that it's there's not a lot of products. So I would say that what we're seeing right now is a lot of multiple offer situations on deals that do make financial sense. So I guess to answer the question, there hasn't been a ton unless it was priced too high to begin with. I know in areas just east of the beach where there is some cash flow, we're seeing huge bidding wars and record prices. And I think that's kind of been a trend across all the areas that we work here at the South Bay Association of Realtors.
Thanks. Jim, back to you. So what if a tenant won't let me into the unit to do any repairs? What can I legally do, you know, without tenant's permission?
This is yet another really common problem I get from landlords. I get calls almost every week. The tenant won't let me in. And right there I go, well, here's a landlord who does not know his business. Okay, gaining lawful access to the privacy of your tenant's home is part of being a landlord. It's landlord 101 in my opinion. Again, we talk about the law. California Civil Code section 1954 lays out how to gain lawful access and the lawful reasons the landlord can enter the privacy of the tenant's home. And this is a concept that landlords really have to get. I am going into the privacy of my tenant's home without a warrant, and I'm not the government. Nobody comes into my house unless I invite them in or they have a warrant, okay? But with rentals, the tenant has to let the landlord in, but for limited reasons. And California Civil Code section 1954 lays out the reasons, and there's one relatively new one. And I have my 24-hour notice of landlord's intent to enter form. CAR, I think, has one. AOA has one. My form lists 11 reasons. 10 of them are in the code, and one of them's a relatively new law. They are, of course, to make necessary agreed-upon repairs. The landlord, irrespective of the tenant's paying rent, landlord must maintain that property in a habitable condition. Has nothing to do with the tenant paying rent. So you have to get inside that unit. You have to maintain it. The government's going to come in to inspect. In rent control, they have a systematic code enforcement program. Every 2 or 3 years, that government's coming in, whether that tenant likes it or not, and you got to get the government in. and usually without an administrative warrant. I think that's a horrible law that nobody's challenged yet, but it's in my form. To make alterations or improvements, you're going to put in ceiling fans and they're not in there, going to do upgrades in there, you can do that. To supply necessary agreed upon services. If you're supplying cable, why would you? But, or other amenities that need to be provided or maintained, you do that. To exhibit the unit to prospective or actual mortgagees. I'm going to buy this unit, or the bank's, and my bank's going to come out and have an appraiser come in. That's a mortgagee. To exhibit it to prospective tenants. Tenant says, I'm moving out next month, great, and you can use that existing tenant's unit as a model for future tenants. Start showing it now. Not a good idea because tenants want to see a nice, new, clean, empty apartment. But you can use, let's say you have a tenant who lives like a perfect model apartment, and I have a dirty tenant that's moving out. I can get into my good tenants unit to show this is what it's going to look like. Okay, you can do that to exhibit prospective tenants, to exhibit the unit to real estate agents or other agents of the owner, to exhibit the dwelling unit to workmen or contractors. I'm loving that one, okay? Pursuant to court order. The property's in litigation, there's some kind of lawsuit going on, and there's civil discovery. I want to come in and inspect the property. Somebody else wants to come in that's suing you. You got to let them in. To determine if the premises have been abandoned. Okay, you can do a 24-hour notice to get in. I think it's abandoned. And the newest one, which I just love, is for periodic smoke detector or CO inspection. That one I love. It happened about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. The legislature said, used to be that commercial units 4 and up, landlord has to maintain the smoke detectors and CO, okay, in residential units. You have to. But for 4 units and under residential rental properties, you could in your contract put on the tenant, you maintain the smoke detectors, you change the batteries out, and that's fine. Well, the legislature says no, landlord, no matter what, no matter the size, now you have to maintain the smoke detectors. Well, how do you know if they're bad? You got to get in to inspect. Now, when I saw that law, I went, oh, this is a great law. Wow, this is just a wonderful law. Yay. Good job, California legislature. It was pretty rare, but they didn't think this one went through. They certainly didn't do it to help landlords out, but it does. And I was getting ready to write a letter to the AOA magazine why this is such a great law for landlords and property managers. And another lawyer beat me to the punch, which is just fine. I read his article, and yeah, he had it right. I'm sure that most landlords will say, oh, here's the legislature again, making another onerous, burden on us. Now I've got to do this, extra work, and for what? Why not? Nah, this is the legislature giving you carte blanche to get into your tenant's unit. I don't need to bring a workman. I don't need to bring my realtor. I don't need to bring a prospective tenant. I don't need to come in and do maintenance. I'm going to come in as a property manager or a landlord because the law says I've got to maintain these things. So I have to inspect. Now, this one lawyer said 4 times a year that you can go in. And I thought, well, okay, that's where lawyers will disagree on actual. Twice a year, once a year for sure, you better be going in to inspect these things. CO monitors. So once a year, property managers and landlords, you better be going in to inspect these things because you've got a lawful obligation to do it. And you'll find the tenants have knocked them off the wall or pulled the batteries out if they're batteries. And oh, by the way, now you know about the new 10-year seal lithium smoke detector, put those in now. But it gives you carte blanche to get in at least twice a year. And so most of the time tenants doing something wrong and you don't have proof of it. And exactly what you want to do is get into the tenant's unit to inspect. Well, the law is really clear. Landlords cannot come in just to inspect. I just read you the lawful reasons. So there's always a way around that. Well, I need to come in to check the smoke detectors. That's my lawful obligation. And while I'm in, I'm going to inspect. So prepare and serve. There's a problem I need. Is there a form for it? Yes. Is it a notice? Yes. 24-hour notice the landlord's intent to enter. Only for those reasons. And you cannot abuse it. If you're trying to play games with this, the law also says you cannot abuse this. And the tenant can sue you. If you're just serving notices to get in just to harass the tenant, there's some stupid landlords that will try that. May give a rise to a cause of action for the tenant to sue you for abuse of this. But for legitimate reasons, that's how you get in. Now, the tenant does not need to be there. The tenant cannot deny you lawful access. Okay? I had served a notice about a year ago on one of my tenants, and I served it coming in 2 days later, do some maintenance, and he calls me up and he's all angry about it. I want to be home. I said, yeah, you can be home. And he said, well, I can't take off work. I said, well, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. Have your mother, your sister, your cousin, whoever over there. You have the right to be there, yes, but I'm coming in. You don't have to be there. Okay, but I'm coming in because I need to do this maintenance. And he wants to argue with, no, I'm not arguing with tenants. Never argue with tenants. Never. There's no reason to it. Just serve the right notice. Everything they need to know by law is in that notice and no more. Now, he wants to argue with me. No, I understand he wants to be there, and he's afraid of people coming in and him not being home and stuff getting stolen. I got the concept. Again, we're invading, from the tenant's perspective, the privacy of their home. And there are home privacy rights, clearly. But we have to go in, and he has to be at work, and he's caught in a catch-22. Well, that's not my problem. It's not the landlord's problem or the property manager's problem. We have to go in to maintain, and we can only go in Monday through Friday, normal business hours. Well, that tenant better be at work during that time. So the law is kind of designed where the tenant can't be there. But that's not our problem either, that's the legislature's. But the tenant does not get to say no. The tenant cannot deny. If you prepare and serve that 24-hour notice with a lawful reason and you show up, you have the right to knock on the door, make sure the tenant's there or not, and have them open the door. If not, then the landlord has the right to open that tenant's front door, which is your front door, really, and go into the privacy of the home without that tenant being there. That's a very, very powerful thing. So if you don't do it, you're running a risk. And last little story, about 6 years ago, I saw in the Orange County Register a landlord who did not know this concept, did not know that he had to prepare and serve a 24-hour notice. I'm the landlord, and I need to do maintenance on this property. I'll take my tools, I'm going to go over. He went over, used his key on his tenant's front door, opened the front door, and the tenant shot him right inside the front door, dropped him dead, right in the chest. And the tenant was just like, whoa, what? Police came out, all hell broke loose. And the cops said, what happened here? This guy broke into my house. But I think it's my landlord. Okay. And, did you know about it? No, he just opened the door and came in. I thought it was a burglar, and I shot him. And, okay, there's a homicide, but there was no murder, no manslaughter, no nothing, no charges brought. Yeah, that landlord paid for it with his life. His wife, the landlord's wife, poor widow, sued, she's screaming, yelling at the district attorney, and the cops arrest this tenant for murder. No, there's no murder here. And then she sued, got some schlock lawyer to sue civilly for wrongful death. I want money back. You killed my husband, and now I don't have my husband anymore, and I've lost the consortium and all that stuff. Judge threw it out. No. That landlord was trespassing. That landlord was burglarizing. Okay? And I thought, man, that's a landlord who paid for, lack of knowledge, to pay for it with his life, and his poor wife, and that poor tenant. I mean, it was a lose-lose, because this landlord did not follow the law, give the tenant notice. The tenant didn't know. So it's notice so the tenant knows you're coming in, and for what lawful reason, then the tenant can't deny you access. So it's kind of deadly serious, gaining lawful access and knowing how to do it and following the law so these tragedies don't happen, much less you're not arrested for trespassing or burglary.
Thanks, Jim. Lee, let's talk about, so currently today, what kind of loan programs or rates are available for buyers for multifamily?
Okay, that's another question. The loan amounts change, the rates change with different size loan amounts. There's under 500,000, which there's not too many banks and lenders that like to do loans less than 500,000. And there's less than $1 million, more than $1 million, more than 2, more than 3, more than 5. So the bottom line is rates are in the mid-3s for the short term, low leverage deals, big loans, to the high 3s for the for like the 5-year money. And 7-year money would be more in the low 4s to 4 to 4 1/4. 10-year money would be more from probably 4 1/4 to 4 1/2. So the hardest deals to finance are the small ones, little $200,000-$300,000 loans. There's only a few lenders that will even touch those deals, and they're going to charge higher rates to do so. So it's all about the loan amount, the loan to value, but bottom line is mid-3s to low 4s.
Thank you, Lee. Michael, so if I were to give you my property, put it in your hands to manage it for me, what does that look like for me? What do you take care of, and what do I take care of as an owner?
There we go again. Battery must be dying. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, and really quickly I want to go back over to something that Jim just said about that case he was just talking about. No matter what, when you enter, it's still, even if you did serve the notice, it's still smart to announce yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You ever forget? I've forgotten. You wake somebody up with a gun next to their bed, or just as bad, you don't want to be caught in the bedroom before a pissed off dog decides to inspect to see who's there. So we always knock on the door and announce ourselves on our way in, and hold the door slightly open just in case there is a dog or an idiot behind the door. So you got to be careful. But back to that, I touched on this a little bit earlier. Again, we take care of everything from the roof to the foundation and under, and anything outside of. So court appearances, rent increases, all of that stuff, anything that has to do with taking care of the property, you give it to us, you basically are freed up to go shopping for another property. All you need to do is read your reports, which, I mean, I think maybe less than half of our clients even do that until the end of the year, and collect your money. You know, we do everything so technologically advanced as we possibly can. We want to make sure it's easy to get money, easy to give money. We set everything up on ACH so that we can pay our owners, or our owners can pay us right through our website. They have their own portal. Same with the residents. You know, they can request maintenance online because we require everything to be in writing from them. They're not just going to get away with, hey, I told the manager. Well, you didn't tell us anything because you didn't put it in writing. And we've actually won cases in court, plenty of them, and the judge basically said, hey, you know, it says right here in the lease that you have to put the maintenance request in writing, otherwise it's like you made no request at all, and we've won those. So all of that stuff, those little things that we're going to court for, whether it's small claims for security deposit accountings and other things like that, we take care of every single thing, the 3 a.m. phone calls included, so that way you are free to be peaceful and go and live and collect your check.
Thanks, Michael. Brett, I know we touched on this. I want to go back to it once more. So what do you think is happening to the residential income market in the beach cities? Do you think it's slowing down at all? What do you think is happening? What do you see over the next couple of years?
Sure, and I think nobody has a crystal ball, so you know, it's just an educated guess here, but it feels like the market's still increasing, maybe at a slowing rate, if that makes sense. It feels like it's plateauing a little bit. Maybe that's on the heels of slightly rising interest rates, but really they've stayed pretty reasonably steady. We're still seeing multiple offer situations, but I would say that stuff that is priced a little high or a little aggressively, we're starting to see it sit for a little bit longer, whereas before, over the last couple of years, I think we've seen people writing offers almost regardless of the price, where they see value. So I think, to summarize, I think it's still increasing, but maybe increasing at a slowing rate.
Thank you. Jim, back to you. So what are the business records and legal documents residential income property landlords need to operate on a residential unit, please?
Okay, good news about this business. Again, as I said before, most everything is in a form. So all you got to do is fill in the blank. Whenever I tell my clients and property managers know this, but my mom and pop landlords, whenever you're going to use a legal document, you want to have the most valid California document first that's up to date. Okay, and don't download stuff off the internet. It might be good for Nebraska, but it's not good for California. And even when you do download stuff from AOA or CAR, one of the things I really love about CAR, they put the revision date top and bottom on the first page, beginning and end. So you can, it's that important. The CAR has this concept. Is this the most up-to-date version of the contract? So what documents you need? I think you only need 7 or 8, and they're all informed. First of all, and 7 of them are legal documents. The first one is an application. All that is information about a prospective tenant. And it's a screening tool. It's not a legal document, but you certainly want that thing filled out, because at the very end of the tenancy, you're going to go back, when that tenancy is over, if that tenant owes you money, you're going to go back to that very first document and look at where his money is so you can go after it. So the application. Second of all, far and away, the most important one is the lease, the rental agreement. Month-to-month tenancy, fixed-term lease, whichever one it is, with all the addendums and attachments you need. The question is, what attachments and addendums do you need? Well, you can call me or join the AOA or hire a professional property manager, and he'll get you what you need. But the lease is by far and away, that's the business. That's almost everything. Then you need a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, because the tenants won't pay on time or won't pay for whatever the reason, does not matter. The only problem is you're not getting paid. and you got bills to pay. So that's our problem as property managers or landlords. A declaration of service, proof of service, there's another one. A 3-day notice to perform covenants or quit, or cure or quit, it's also called. In non-rent control, in rent control and non-rent control, both, a 30-day notice of change in terms of tenancy. In rent control, you can only raise the rent by what the government says you can raise the rent. It's socialism and social welfare, tenant welfare without regard to need, if you think about it. But you need to serve a proper 30-day notice to raise the rent even by 3%. Non-rent control, the law covers how you raise it and what notice. 30-day notice of change in terms of tenancy to rent increase, essentially. 30 or 60-day notice to terminate tenancy in non-rent control properties. You don't use those very often unless you're going to terminate a tenancy. And then finally, a security deposit accounting form. At the end of the tenancy, when the tenant's gone, and you have a security deposit, landlord shall, law again, prepare and serve on the tenant a written accounting of their security deposit, making any lawful deductions therefrom, and refund any unused portion. That's word for word the law. Okay? And a lot of landlords, well, they owe me money and I'm just going to use the deposit. No. You got to tell the tenant in writing why you're keeping their deposit. Most all the time, when you do the security deposit accounting, the tenant ends up owing you money when you're giving them full credit, but you got to do it in writing and have it backed up by all the invoices. So I think those are the basic essential tools. And, 24-hour notice of landlord's intent to enter. We talked about that. So those are the essential tools and documents. Rent roll. You need to maintain how you receive rent for each apartment on paper. Big problem. I always ask all my clients, how do you keep track of your rent on paper? Well, I give receipts. Oh, God, no. Do not do that. Where's your rent roll? It's a rent roll. It's like a store without a cash register. You have to have a rent roll. The IRS released a study about 8-10 years ago about the professions or jobs that people have that they like to focus on to audit. Number one is lawyers. Okay, great. And I'll leave it to you to think why did the IRS like to look at lawyers. Number 3 is landlords. So for me as a lawyer and a landlord, I got a bull's on my back. Audit me, IRS and Franchise Tax Board. And the reason why it's so high is because the IRS and Franchise Tax Board know what I'm telling you is landlords don't keep good business records. They don't have a rent roll. And so they audit you, or they don't keep the documentation for the repairs. Every single Home Depot invoice, work order, pest control, all this receipts for maintenance repairs. You must maintain that stuff. And rent roll, properly kept, is critical. How much money have I made on this business for this year for this one business? Every apartment is its own business. One rent roll, 12 months for each door. Is that paperwork? Yeah. That's what property managers do. That's what every landlord has to do. So at the end of the year, you've got how much money have I taken in for apartment number 1? Bang, right there. So when it comes to tax time, you go rent roll to rent roll to rent roll, 20 apartments in one building, got 20 in a building, bam, 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 bam. And you add them up, there's the income for the year. But without the rent roll, you're digging and slugging and going through bank records and no, rent roll, okay? So rent roll, receipts, the notices, the contract, those are the essential things to really operate the business.
Thanks, Jim. Lee, let's talk about rehab and reposition loans. What's out there today?
Bridge loans, we call them. The traditional one is where your client wants to buy, a 50, 60, 70, 80 unit building, and then he wants to raise rents 30, 40%, and there's a lot of cosmetic rehab to do. And we might do a loan where the bank will finance based on the market rent stabilized, and then do a holdback for interest reserves because the current rents don't support the loan. And that loan is typically about a year or two. So it depends on how much time the client needs to do what he wants to do. If it's a cosmetic deal, it might only be a 1 year in and out turnaround, or even less than that. If it's a major rehab, renovation, reposition, it might be a full 18-month, 2-year cycle, where they're going to eventually turn over all the units, and every single unit they're going to probably upgrade kitchens and baths and this and that, $5,000, $7,000, $8,000 per unit rehab. Spend a lot of money to do it. And then you have the small scale stuff where someone's buying a little 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 units, and the rents are 30% below market. These type of bridge loans don't really exist for those small loans. So we usually go with the client that pays cash, or he just takes the best loan he can get with 50% down, and we do a loan with no prepay, then refi after 12 months with a new loan. Or we do a private money loan for a quick close. So then there's another loan we call the earn-out, or additional advance, whereas it's for a property where the rents are below market, and the client has plans to raise rents to market in the first 6 to 8 months, maybe 9 months. So what the bank does is they say, okay, the current rents support a 50% loan, but the market rents support 75. So we're going to do a 75% loan, but we're going to hold back 15%. You're going to put 50% down. You have X amount of time to get the rents to market, provide 2 or 3 months stabilized operating statements, and then we're going to advance you the additional advance. And so a year after they buy it, they're into it with their leverage. That's kind of how it works.
Excellent. Thank you. Back to property management. So in contrast, what are the rents you're getting in a particular area versus what the neighboring property management companies are getting?
What we're finding is that some of the areas they have no cap. The more we spend, the more we can charge. We're getting to caps in some areas, but like with Inglewood and Long Beach, the nicer we're making them, the more we're charging. And one of my goals always is to make sure we're leading the market in whatever neighborhood we're in. If we find somebody who's renting an apartment for $1,100, we're marketing for $1,200. And we, again, back to the schooling that we do, we don't just go to school for property management, we go to school for sales and things like that, for personal development, and train our people on how to do these things better than the neighbors are. Typically our properties are the nicest ones on the blocks, and for that, they're paying an extra price for that. And we really pride ourselves in going above and beyond for our owners on that as well.
Thanks, Michael. Brett, last question for you. A lot of people who are into commercial properties, not only do they use the MLS, but they also use LoopNet and CoStar. What do you think about these two programs? Do you think one is better than the other? And also, do you use it as a term of prospecting, using those?
Yeah, so we do subscribe to LoopNet and CoStar, and obviously we're members of the South Bay Association of Realtors. We use all of them, I'd say. Smaller apartment, I mean, I'd say that the association is really good with multifamily. A lot of the sales comps are on the South Bay Association, MLS. But when you're getting into true commercial product, you're going to need CoStar and LoopNet. And I'm not giving a plug for CoStar or LoopNet, but CoStar is a comp service and LoopNet is a marketing service that you use when working with commercial product. And really you need both. If you're going to try to list a property or represent a buyer to the best of your ability, you're going to need to know what commercial properties have sold in an area. One thing that's interesting, and I only know this because we're renegotiating our contract with LoopNet and CoStar, but you can get a free account for LoopNet to look up listings that are available. But what I've found out now just in my recent negotiations is that if you have a free account, you're only seeing listings that brokers are paying for the premium listings. So you're only seeing the premium listings. So you're going to be missing a lot of the free listings that actually are out there if you're not a member of CoStar or LoopNet. So for you guys as agents, if you're going to be working in the commercial realm, you will want to talk to your broker probably about getting that product. So,
absolutely, I agree. This question has come up every year when Jim's here. I'm going to bring it up one more time, have him talk about it. This is important. So Jim, please, he's the best at this. What's the relocation cost for getting someone to move in a rent control unit? We get that all the time. People love the way Jim explains this.
Okay. First of all, commercial real estate, we're not talking about, business storefronts and retail. We're not talking about that. Residential landlord-tenant law is totally different and separate from commercial. Commercial, for my purposes, is retail, stores and businesses that are for sale, providing a product or a service, not the business of being a landlord. Residential, multifamily, residential income property, the laws are just for that. Stores and shopping centers and strip malls and gas stations, anything commercial, the landlord-tenant laws are different from that. Rent control is just for residential. And the 3 cities that have general rent control laws are Los Angeles, the city limits of Los Angeles, and that covers a huge area, Santa Monica and West Hollywood. They're all very onerous, and they all provide for limited eviction of a tenant for no cause, but the landlord has to essentially file a declaration saying that I have one of these exceptional lawful reasons under the rent control law to evict this perfectly good tenant for no fault of the tenant, file a declaration, and then you get to pay relocation assistance, okay, to the tenant, because the tenant's not at fault here. I want my property back because I'm going to move into it myself, or have my daughter move in, or I have a big building and I need a resident manager and I don't have one, and there's all these reasons. The rent control law says, yeah, you can evict a tenant for no fault of the tenant, okay? But you have to have one of these reasons. You got to file a declaration under penalty of perjury saying you have one, because the cities will check on it. And so it's not something to play with. The amount of relocation assistance depends upon the city and depends upon whether, at least in LA, whether they're qualified tenants or non-qualified. And it depends on whether their age, whether they have any children, whether they're disabled, okay? And I believe the last time I checked for relocation in LA rent control, $19,600 relocation, something like that. Yeah, it's a boatload for qualified tenants. For a single woman with one child who's been there for more than 3 years, yeah, 19,000 something at last check. Now, with that said, I don't recommend ever paying relocation assistance. That should shock your conscience. Why should I, if I want to have my daughter move in or my mom move into one of my apartments, anybody, an immediate family member, why should I have to put a down payment on a house for one of my tenants so I can have the privilege of moving into my own property, especially at that much? Now, I understand the tenant's not at fault, and it does cost to move, and it's an inconvenience at least. It's a pain to move, okay? And so a nominal sum, a fair sum, the cost of moving when the tenant's not at fault in rent control, still don't agree with it. Why should I have to pay you to move off of my property when I just want you to move and I got to give you 30 or 60 days advance notice? Just go find another place. That's the free market, but the free market is not so free anymore, especially in rent control. No, you have to have a lawful reason, and you have to pay relocation. So doesn't that shock you? I got to pay $19,600? That should stop everybody in their tracks. Like, wow, that's just, I don't have that much money for a one-bedroom apartment or 2, doesn't matter. I got to pay $19,600? Why would you do that? I've had many landlords call the city or talk to somebody or, well, here's the law, and yeah, it is the law. But there's ways around it, you know, and that's what I do. Evicting rent control tenants because who can afford that? It's stupid. And does it really cost $19,600 for a tenant to move? No, that's a down payment on a house. That's just nuts. There's no rational basis, no societal or governmental purpose for a landlord anybody having to pay somebody else almost $20,000 to relocate. You know, but that's our cities and who we vote for. If you don't like it, you think that's wrong, well, then we have to talk about politics, unfortunately. But we're not going to get into that. There are ways around it, and this is what I do a lot of. And it's really hard to do, getting around the rent control law. Rent control is pretty much designed to keep landlords from doing what they want to do. And the government say, no, you're going to do this. Rent control is landlord control. It's a misnomer. Okay, so when we're talking rent control property, it's a whole different thing. And you must know as realtors or as landlords, if you're buying rent control, it's not like anything else. It's a totally different operation. The LA City rent control law is about 1.5 inches thick of just LA City rent control law. That's on top of the state law. And so this is high risk. Oh yeah, you can go to jail. The LA rent control law says a landlord who violates the terms of this statute, this ordinance, one, it's defense to an eviction, complete defense. And two, it can be a misdemeanor. If you have a rent control property that's not registered, you are guilty right then of a misdemeanor. And I have had many clients come to me, they've closed escrow, and they don't have that statement of registration. It is rent controlled, and it's not registered. They just bought a crime. They just became a criminal when the escrow closed. And they're like, whoa. I said, you get down there and register it right now. Because the rent control law says landlord cannot even ask for rent. And it's a misdemeanor to own a rent control property that's not registered, period. A misdemeanor, punishable by a year in jail and $20,000 or both. All I did was close escrow and buy a duplex. Yeah, this is, I don't say deadly serious, that's overstating it, but it's really, really serious. And so when I say one of the essential documents for rent control, statement of registration, okay, is this thing legal? Is this thing currently registered? Yeah. Do I know rent control law that I'm buying a headache? Yeah. But to answer the question, 19,006 for qualified, and it's a sliding scale. I think it starts at 9,000 something at a minimum. For a 20-year-old, perfectly healthy, young person with no kids who's been in for 6 months, 9,000 something. So that's at 9,000, it goes up to 19,600 in LA. But it varies, it changes all the time, and it varies by city. So a hard and fast number, don't hold me to it, but it's a bunch, and it's onerous, and there are ways around it, but it's very difficult to do.
Thank you, Jim. You think that's something you guys want to know if you're ever representing a buyer? Last question before we go out. This is for Lee. I'm going to just read it out. So if an LLC is buying a property with a group of people in the LLC, does the lender need to qualify everyone in the group or just the people or the person in charge? Please.
Good question. The rule of thumb is anybody who owns 20% as a member or managing member technically might need to be a borrower. There is some gray area and some wiggle room on a case-by-case, depending on the deal, the size, the loan size, and so forth, to where there's a few members, they're not managed members, but they might own 20, 30, 40%, but the real weight is on the managing member who might only own 10 or 15%, but their personal financials are strong enough to float the boat, so to speak. So that's a case-by-case, but the bottom line is anybody who owns 20% or more might need to also be a borrower. And it's a case-by-case on who we can, wiggle out to be a general partner.
Thank you, Lee. So those are the questions that we have from our panel. At this point, I'm going to ask Nikki, if you guys have any questions, keep it general, but by all means, just raise your hands and Nikki will let you ask your questions. Open floor.
Hi, this is for Jim. In regards to the Staple certificate, if, let's say, for a triplex and the leases were just recently updated and the buyer and seller agreed to just leases but no Staple certificate, will the seller be in jeopardy just by?
I got it. Thank you. The seller, no. And under those facts, if the leases were just updated within the last 2 or 3 months, hey, good seller. Yeah, I mean, but do you need a stop? Do you need them then? No. But how many situations like that are there? No. The various tenants have been in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 years, and you want a stop certificate to bring each one of those contracts, each one of those businesses up to speed so you know what the current is. And as I said, sometimes the sellers won't fully disclose all the current rents or something like that. Yeah, this one, I think this was going down. And so the estoppels back up what the seller's telling you from the tenant's perspective. So I always recommend them, but in that scenario, do you need them if it's 2, 3 months old? No, if they're modern contracts, 3 months old, the odds are nothing much has changed, so you don't need to update by way of an estoppel from the tenant.
This question is for Brett, I believe it is. Yeah, from a marketing perspective, how have you found the best way to find multifamily sellers, and is it different for 2 to 4s versus large buildings?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So at our group, we believe in in farming, which I know a lot of people understand the concept. So we'll focus on a particular area. We'll pick whatever size building we're going after. We do a lot of prospecting, calling. We send a lot of mail. And through a lot of those calls, we'll develop an email list for a particular farm, and then we're able to communicate via email too. So I'd say calling, mailing, emailing, and then social media and online presence is kind of coming into play now too. So.
This question is for anybody. Have you ever sold a property, or have you ever had a client who bought a property and he didn't actually have a grant deed or anything, but he just bought the LLC? Years ago, we used to do that, and is that still a possible way of buying a property by just buying the LLC?
I guess maybe that's more of a legal question. The answer is yeah.
Yeah, it is
if the LLC is the owner of record of all the property.
Yeah, of course, the LLC
Yeah,
would
you buy the company, the limited liability company, and you buy all that company's assets, which are the properties and the contracts, et cetera. So you can buy the LLC, and when you transfer all rights, title, and interest of the business, part of that rights, title, and interests are titles to the properties and the contracts, the leases. So yeah, you can.
How long do you think it takes the tax assessor to figure out that you should be paying more taxes?
Well, that I don't know. That's a tax question. I'm not a CPA. But thanks for asking.
So I have two questions. First for Brett. You mentioned larger properties have a different cap rate. Is that 5 or more, or what do you consider a larger property?
So maybe I need to clarify. So asking what the going cap rate is very area specific, product type specific. It's like saying, it'd be tough to generalize a given cap rate. It's like saying, what's the price per square foot? Well, it's going to be different if it's on the Strand or if it's further east. But I think what I meant by larger apartment buildings, I'd say in smaller apartment buildings, the financial metric that's used more often is the gross rent multiplier because it doesn't take expenses into consideration. And the reason I think that that's used more is again, with a lot of smaller apartment buildings, you don't know the level of the operator, how good they are they running other expenses through it. So I think that as representing buyers, it's easier to look at a gross rent multiplier when you're comparing properties because you're kind of taking that question mark away. With larger properties, generally, I think what I meant was more institutional style investments. The expenses are going to be more stabilized. They're going to be more real, and I think that's why that's an effective way of looking at investments when they're just a little bit larger.
Okay. And Jim, is San Pedro rent controlled?
Almost all of it is. It took me about 6 years of practice to find there's a square right in the middle of San Pedro that's LA County. It's called the Los Ramblas area. And if you used to have Thomas guides for all of your older folks like me, if you look at a Thomas guide, you'd see this little square that's a different color. And that's LA County, which is not. So yes, almost all of San Pedro is rent control. And rent control is 2 or more dwelling units on the same lot that was built before October, I'll give you the right date, October 31st of 1978. So people say, if it's built before 1979, it's rent controlled if it's in the city limits of LA. And that's a really good, you want to look at the map and know. There's some really weird areas like San Pedro there, Gardena, the Torrance PO, that's all LA. Well, it's Torrance. No, it's LA. LA City, it's rent control. Well, it says Torrance, yeah, that's what PO means, Is it LA City? And then Gardena has Gardena, unincorporated, and LA City running all through it. One side of the street will be rent controlled, LA City, the other side will be either unincorporated county or Gardena City. Wild stuff here in LA, but so the actual map and knowing exactly where that property is and what city, if any, that property sits in determines rent control.
Thank you. I have a question on rent control, and I am representing the buyer. The buyer wants to buy in Wilmington. I found a triplex, 2 empty and 1 is occupied. The landlord do not want to evict them. My clients do not want to deal with eviction. However, I told them I like solutions, so let's go and talk to the tenants and see where they are. Well, we find out that they have been in the property for 30 years, 65 years old, and I think they are maybe handicapped. So I told my clients that's going to be very difficult for you to get them out because they're going to be moving into the property. So what are the chances for them to get them out after they close escrow?
Wow. Yeah. These are the kind of things I get every day practically. Yet another one. Geez, I don't want to do this for free. No. I would leave them alone because they're really sympathetic, one, and there's where rent control is really kind of needed, and that's really rare. I've been there for 30 years, I'm 65 years old, I'm on a fixed income, but this is a business. Am I supposed to have sympathy and provide charity? Am I in the charity business? No, okay? It's a business. I'm buying at the current market, fair market value, and I've got a high mortgage with interest and taxes and insurance that I got to meet. And this tenant who's been there in a two-bedroom for 30 years, paying $550 a month for a $1,600, $1,700 unit, look at the money per month you're losing and add that up by 12, and there you go. There are ways around. I would leave them alone. Move in and have fun. It's not going to cash flow. It's going to be a negative. But if they really need to get them out, there's two ways. One, pay relocation, but you got, again, we talked about that, just touched on it. Or find a breach. Find a breach. Find cause. Or, last resort, there are ways to create the tenant, to cause the tenant to breach. And these may seem harsh, especially in that situation. Boy, I've had cases like that where I don't relish them, but I understand the landlord. I got my client to represent, and he's losing, $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year on that one-bedroom apartment, $12,000 every year, and he can't afford this. So the rent control law does not allow him to go to the tenant and say, look, you got a two-bedroom, you're paying $550, this thing will rent for $1,700. Let me raise your rent by, $75, and then 6 months. No, that's violating rent control law. A landlord can go to jail for doing that. Okay, so you either have to. It's sad. This is where it works against the good tenants. Rent control. Here's a really good example. The landlord really has to evict that tenant economically, or eat it. That's his choice. And I've had many landlords come to me that recently bought a property, and I got to get this guy gone. It's not cash flowing. It's just stupid. It's $1,000 a month under market. Yeah, and we have to go out a perfectly good, nice, tenant who's sweet and good, and we have to evict them and ruin their credit in order to get this done because of rent control. Okay. That's when the good tenant pays hard on this. And yeah, I'll do it. I don't like doing it, but from the landlord's perspective, he's got no choice. And it's the city's fault for doing this. And so if that client came to me, yeah, we can do it. It's going to be hard. I'm no guarantee. It's difficult. And this is what I do. Let's sit down and look at the contract, really analyze it. Let's see if there's any breach right now. And then if not, that's a perfect tenant. Let's see if we can create a breach on behalf of the tenant so we can evict them. I'm not Simon Legree, but that's where it starts touching the line. But the city of the rent controls interfering with the free market caused this. He has no choice but to evict. And I've represented tenants. I had a 67-year-old retired school teacher in San Pedro in a two-bedroom paying $800 a month. And he was getting evicted. And we beat the landlord the first time. I said, he's going to get it right, because you're a tenant. He'll find a way. And we negotiated the second time around, some relocation, not 19,006, something reasonable. But this perfectly good retiree, like these folks, is getting evicted because, they're under market, and the city does not allow the landlord and tenant to negotiate freely under contract, saying, let me raise it 75 here, and then 6 months, another 75, and this is what we're going to do. Yeah, that sounds like good. I understand $500, $1,500, but it's, no, tenant, landlord cannot do that, and they try it all the time. Do not try that, folks. Okay, even if the tenant consents. Okay, there may be a way that I could do it, but I wouldn't even try it. If you violate the rent control law, that tenant, I'm going to pay you $5,000 to move out. Tenant say, heck yeah, hit the lottery. I'm gone. Give me the $5,000. Great, problem solved. Landlords try it. Rent control landlords try it. And then that tenant's gone and everything. Hey, it worked. Pff, Thompson was wrong. I had 19. What's it? Thompson's crazy. I paid him $5. He's gone. Hey, I'm a smart, slick I'm a good landlord. Good business. Great, fine. And if it works and you never hear about it, good, you got away with it. But that tenant will be at a party sometime. Hey, my landlord paid me $5,000 to move out. He's bragging about it to somebody at a party, and the other drunk guy, buddy, you could have got 19.6. Are you crazy? You got taken advantage of. And they hire a lawyer, and they sue the landlord back for violating the rent control law. Okay? It does happen. Do not play with rent control. Do not play with rent control. Okay? It's just not worth it.
Can I add on to that real quickly? Absolutely. Another thing, too, that you have to remember with rent control and the minimums, those only apply when they can be forced out when it's not their fault.
Right.
Like, say it's a non-permitted unit. In the city says, oh, they have to leave, now you got to pay them relocation assistance. That's when those minimums apply. If it's a situation like this where you just want somebody to move, you got to negotiate, and you could pay up to $50,000 or some other number. You know, the minimums are when they're forced to go. Other than that, it's a negotiation, what's going to get them to go. Because they don't have to leave in some of those cases. You know, when they're paying rent on time and they're not doing anything wrong, it's almost impossible to get them out, even if you want to move into the unit. If they have a one-bedroom unit and there's another one-bedroom unit there, typically, when you force people out, you got to force the last one who was in there. So basically, the highest paying rent is the one you get to go take.
Exactly.
You don't get to go take the low-paying one. So there's a lot of nuances, and you got to really have somebody who knows how to navigate that when you're dealing with those and really know what they're talking about. Because if you just tell somebody, oh, it's 19.6, you can just force them out. You can't do that. So it's really important.
Hi, lots of great information this morning. A couple things. I'm buying a multi-unit right now, my first, and I was going to self-manage it. And after this panel conversation this morning, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hire a property manager. I'm scared. Yeah. And I kind of have two questions. Number one, if I buy the property in my name, can I move it into an LLC afterwards? That's number one. Whoever would handle that.
Yeah, that's a simple yes.
Yeah?
Yes, you can. However, the lender you might need to alert the lender that's what you're doing, and they'll be okay with it. It could be a transfer.
Okay. And then number two, I heard that rent control may go on the ballot in Long Beach. And if that happens, what does that mean, and how would they implement it, and that kind of stuff?
They've been talking about that for years, and slowly but surely, steps have already been initiated with like the PRIP registrations. Those are typically the first steps. They start minor controls, but they've been talking about it for a long time. Everybody feels that the growing consensus is that it's going to happen. It's just not a question of if but when. And you know, right now there's nothing hardcore coming up about it, but we just feel it's just constantly moving that way.
Yeah, I'm sorry, quick, I heard the same thing, and I 1031 exchanged out of two LA rent control properties into Long Beach, and now, shoot. So, you know, and oh, by the way, when he was talking about, you know, the buyer's market and a feeding frenzy, oh my gosh, he's right. And a lot of investors are trying to get out of, you know, why work so hard and have so much risk and effort and liability and government intrusion into your business when I don't have to have it in Long Beach or non-rent controlled areas. So, you know, after 12, 15 years of being a rent controlled landlord, I can do it, but why? It's just too much work, and it's not a good ROI, return on investment. So I bought in Long Beach, but now they're going to go the same way. I'll move out of the state if I have to. I'll do the Toyota thing. I'm out of here if it gets that bad. But, you know, can you manage a rent controlled California rent control? For sure you can. Look how many properties there are. Is it profitable? Yeah, it's just a lot more work and risk and liability that does not need to be. Does not need to be. And as you see in just these couple examples, rent control, eviction control works against everybody except the bad actor tenant. It protects the bad actor tenant to the detriment of the good tenant. If you have a building with one bad rent control tenant in it who's disturbing the entire other tenancies, and you can't evict that tenant, who's paying for that? Well, the landlord is, yeah, but every tenant in that building. And that's a real common, it's almost an epidemic. A landlord, I got to evict this tenant. She's on drugs and she's screaming and yelling in the middle of the night, and I want a 30-day. No, you can't. You got to get her cause. Get her arrested. Well, the cops won't come out. Yeah, you got a problem there. But the tenants are threatening to move out. The good tenants threatening to move out. Yep. Yep. Who'd you vote for in the city council elections? What I say.
All right. You guys were talking about picking up some larger multi-unit families that are under market and then bringing them up for either qualification purposes on the bridge loans and stuff. How do you get an under market rent up above or to market value in under a year without being able to do the gradual increases over time in non-rent control areas? I mean, because...
So in non-rent control areas, it's the simplest way to explain it and oversimplify is you could just give rent increases to the amounts that you want when you want. Now, of course, the amounts depend on whether it's going to be a 30-day notice or a 60-day notice, but other than that, in non-rent control, you have freedom. to do that. You can terminate, or and remodel the apartment and re-let it, or you can just simply raise the rents and see who leaves.
Even if they had an existing, like they came in with an existing 2-year lease and they're only halfway through.
So they do have to be on month to month. That's it. And a lot of those people can be, bought out certain ways too. If the owner depends on his goals and how much money he has and wants to put up. If somebody's paying $800 and they're in a 2-year lease and he knows he can get $1,200, he might offer some cash for that. We do it a lot just to avoid the evictions, just because we don't. It's going to cost the same for us to pay for an attorney to kick them out as it will. As it will for us to do cash for keys to get them out a lot sooner. So if we can get you out by the end of the month and pay you $1,000, it's better than going, the eviction route and getting them out in 90 days and still having to pay that amount and then not lose that rent for those other 2 months. It doesn't make sense. So we're finding quicker ways around those.
Jim Thompson, you mentioned breaches, but you didn't describe them, would you?
It's all contract-based. Non-payment of rent. I mean, you can evict. That's any breach of covenant. Again, non-payment of rent is the number one we go at, but non-payment of rent, if you try to evict a tenant to get them out for whatever reason, rent control, you want to raise the rent, or they're just not paying the rent, and I'm tired of them not paying the rent, I want to get a rent-paying tenant in, better business, is the number one cause for eviction, non-payment of rent. The downside to choosing that method is that particular breach is there's a habitability defense. If you're a really good landlord, have a good manager that maintains the building, should be no problem. Anything but rent, any other provision in that contract that the tenant's in breach of is a different notice to perform or quit, and you look, for every problem you have, first thing you do is you go to your contract, because it's in there. It better be in there. If it's not in there, and you're using the CAR contract or AOA or AGLA contract, man, that's a really weird situation, because those three contracts cover, I'd say 98, 99% of every possible problem or issue that this business can cause, or that tenant can cause you. So to answer your question, there's thousands of different factual breaches, but if you read through your contract, anything that they're doing wrong, or they're not doing it that they're supposed to do, or doing that they're not supposed to do, it's in your contract. So to ask what other breaches, it'd take me 3 days to go through every factual scenario in my situation that is a breach of contract, but it's in the contract, okay?
Can I add on to that too? Just something that Jim mentioned earlier, some people, when they buy a property, they got a 2-page lease. It's not good. Typically what we do is part of the due diligence when somebody's bringing a property onto us, we find out, typically through the rent roll, if they have one, who's month to month and who's in a lease. And when we do our takeover notices, we change the terms right then and there and just serve upon them our lease. And this is only a non-rent control where you can do it unilaterally, but we just serve a change in terms and we'll just put their names on a new lease. They don't even have to sign it. That's just the new terms. Now that gives us way more reasons to evict and different standards to hold them to.
Hey Jim, follow up to the entering the units. I've done like a lot of evictions where the tenant will refuse, either verbally or physically refuse access. Mm-hmm. And for us, it's like, we see it like a layup. Like, we just document that you refused access. We tried to come in for whatever reasons we had to come in, and they'll refuse, either verbally, like just say straight out, like, do not enter the unit, and we'll document that. We'll try a couple times, and we'll go to court with that, and it's worked out well. Like, so whenever that happens for us, we actually kind of like it because it's easier for us.
Well, yeah, provided you're you're following the law.
Yeah, everything's
24-hour notice.
Yeah.
Right. No, the tenant. When I said the tenant cannot say no if you're following the law, 24-hour notice, et cetera. No, they cannot say no. If they do say no, and you've documented it or videoed it, videoed it or audio recorded it, documented it, and you have witnesses, and you can go to court. Now, quite interesting on that very issue, there's a split in California authority that I actually created about 5 years ago. My philosophy is if the tenant denies the landlord lawful access, that's a violation of 1954, violation of law, and you can 3-day notice to terminate. California Code of Civil Procedure 1161 sub 4, violation of law. 3-day notice to terminate. Very rare. But that was my legal opinion, and I brought an unlawful detainer case against somebody who, landlord served 24-hour notice, tenant says, no, you're not going to come in, he documented it. Nice, strong case. And I used the notice, 3-day notice to terminate. You're gone. 3 days, get out, because you broke the law. Went to court, Attorney on the other side, we knocked down, dragged it out. And the judge says, yeah, it's a violation of law. I mean, 1954 says you got to let him in if he follows the law, and he did. And you cannot deny the landlord access. I mean, he's got to get in there to fix it. Why are you denying access to the landlord when he wants to come in and spend his money, his time, to make your place better for free for you? There's no rational reason to deny the landlord access. And the judge found in my favor, but they appealed it. And the appellate court sustained the appeal, saying, yeah, denial of access, violation of the law, 3-day notice to terminate, get out, for this case only. They didn't publish it. And so I can't cite it as, so to err on the side of the caution, to win that kind of case, they violate the 3-day notice 24-hour notice to enter. He denies access, you document it, then serve a 3-day notice to perform covenant and acquit, which is, it's usually 24-hour notice is in your contract, but it doesn't need to be, it's in the law. You got to let me in, you deny me access, I'm setting the date, you let me in, one more chance, 3-day notice, within those 3 days, at this day, at this time, you're going to let me in or I'm going to evict you. And yeah, they're close to, they're not a slam dunk, but they're strong cases, put it that way, so yeah.
What about refusal for like aggressive or barking dog? Like no one's there, but you can't go in with the dog barking.
Yeah, well, that's a question of fact for the judge to decide. I mean, if you've got video of it, and look, I served a 24-hour notice, and I did it twice. I would say, I would recommend to you, if you're my client, let's do it again. And then let's do a 3-day notice to perform a quit. Oh, by the way, your contract says no dog, no pets. Get rid of the dog and let me in. A double notice to perform or quit. And if the dog's still there, that would be a strong case for breach of contract and breach of contract essentially. So videos. Everybody's got their portable television studio in their pocket. It's a wonderful time document wise to be a landlord or property manager.
So it all comes back to the notices.
Oh yeah. If you follow, the tenant says, if you don't follow the law, the tenant can't. He's absolutely right. You're not coming in. And he's absolutely within his rights to say no. And if you do come in without that notice, he's absolutely within his rights to drop you dead like that one guy, because you are trespassing. It's a big difference. And to us as landlords of property, I need to get in. Yeah, got it. But you're going into the privacy of his home without his consent. That's a very powerful thing. But the law puts this obligation on all landlords to do repairs. That's the biggest thing. So it's a serious thing, gaining lawful access and knowing the entry procedure, knocking on the door, even with the 20, and cracking it open, knocking, and banging on the door, then cracking open, calling out. So even if that person has a 24-hour notice and he's sleeping, you're not startling him. There's just a way to do this business, and everything else is a guess, and it's a risk. So, but yeah, the remedy for a tenant denying the landlord or the landlord's manager or workers lawful access is eviction. And yeah, I've won a bunch of them, yeah.
I have a client looking in West Hollywood at 3 units. They're telling us that it's not rent control because it's legally a single family.
Oh.
Wondering if that will ever backfire because it's very much 3 units right now.
Is it a 3-unit building?
It's 3 units. It was converted to 3 units, but it's legally a single family right now.
So you're telling me it's bootleg?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just, I'd walk away from that deal no matter what. Because when you close the escrow, you got one, just the bootleg, okay? That's violation of law. Forget rent control. You close on a unit that's bootleg, again, building inspection will tell you this. Common sense will tell you. But a building inspector, this is not permitted. Building inspection, not appraiser, separate and apart. A licensed building, professional certified building inspector gives you a report. That's bootleg. Oh, geez. Stop, time out, escrow, type stuff. I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. I mean, you're going to get hammered with that. One, it's bootleg, violation of law, you're a criminal, buying and owning a bootleg unit. And then second, if it is rent control and it's not registered, municipal code, West Hollywood, yeah, I wouldn't touch that thing with a 10-foot pole. I'd turn around and walk away. No. Get it up to code, and then call me back when you got up to code and it's registered as a rent control unit, and then we'll look at it if it's a great investment. But another thing about rent control, a comparable non-rent control unit should sell for more, because rent control is landlord control and more cost and less income, et cetera, et cetera. So again, rent control decreases the taxes, the fair market value. Should. I mean, if I got a 4-unit in Wilmington and a 4-unit in Long Beach, that Long Beach 4-unit, and I actually had that situation. Properties very similar, 4 units, built about the same time, same quality construction, pretty much same amenities. Huge difference in value, because one's rent control and one's not. So rent control, when you're looking at it, is you want to really be cautious. I'm not saying don't buy rent-control property. I mean, you can do it, but you got to go in fully knowledgeable with your eyes open and be sure while you're in escrow that you've got all your ducks lined up, that this thing is legal and you know what you're doing as a rent-control buyer. And I'm ready to be a rent-control landlord in that particular city. West Hollywood laws are totally different than LA, and totally different. West Hollywood law is just insane. I read through it, and who wrote this? A sixth grader? I mean, on Potter, on I don't know what, but it's just unintelligible, and it has no rational basis. Rent control laws are, LA is kind of crazy, Santa Monica is more nuts, and West Hollywood makes zero sense. So when I heard West Hollywood rent control, I start laughing. You know, it's just, it's a great area. The property values are really good. Who wouldn't want to live up there? It's nice. But as a landlord, rent controlled, single family would not be. So I say, oh yeah, you're right, go ahead and buy it. Yeah, sure. Bootleg, no, don't buy, that's a crime. Rent control that's not registered, oh no, that's 2 crimes. I mean, you're going to be a double criminal. So I'd walk away from that. I'm not going to jail for business, that's crazy. That's my thought on it. Now, you may want to get a second legal opinion, but anybody who tells you something different, I'd be curious about that. I'd like to talk to that attorney, and we might have a difference, but no, walk away from that one.
Can I add on to that too real quick? Just another thing you got to think about when doing those things is there's at least 2 people that the city will force you to kick out and pay the relocation fees to. So that's, you know, about 40 grand right there. Then they're going to force you to put everything back the way it was originally permitted. And that's going to cost you probably the same again. So that's 80 grand right there they're going to look at paying besides everything else that he mentioned. And another thing he mentioned, he brought up Gardena too. I wanted to say this too. Gardena is crazy everywhere, like LA City, county, and then there's one spot where you can call the police and the Gardena cops will actually show up too. In that area, the law is forcing people, again, like the other woman brought up earlier about kicking people out because serving a rent increase causes a mediation to take place. We don't serve rent increases anymore. We just kick people out because otherwise you lose. Because if you do lose, then you're looking at retaliation if you try to kick them out after that. So to avoid the retaliation, you just 60-day notice, kick them out, and re-let the place.
All right, last question. How do you collect late fees or utility payments? If they're not paying and you serve a 3-day notice, they pay the rent. Because I've heard if you don't, you shouldn't put that on the 3-day notice because the judge will throw it out. How do you collect it then?
Right. Well, go ahead. You know this. I'm sure.
First thing you got to do is read your notice. Your notice is 3-day pay or quit for rent, which means you can only use that notice for rent. If your contract has everything in it about paying RUBS or whatever else you're charging, then that's a performance issue. And they have to perform, so you serve a 3-day perform it or quit notice to them to pay the late fees and any other fees. Get that? Jim, is that right?
That's right. That's what he said.
Yes, ma'am. Last one.
In general, yes. Single family, one house, one family on a lot. I had a woman who, her husband died, she had a 4-bedroom house, single family house, and her kids grew up, and she's not leaving her house, but she was very elderly, and that's her home, and she says, gee, I could sure use a little extra income and some more company in this big house. It's kind of lonely here. I'll start renting out rooms. And so what she did was, one, in a single family R1 area, create a business, and then second of all, she created a multi-family boarding house. And she calls me up, and my tenants aren't paying rent, and I'm getting in trouble with the city. And she's a widow, her kid's grown, and all she did was rent rooms out for a little extra income, helping people have a place to live, and some company, and really cheap rent. Oh, no, she converted that single-family house into a multi-family. It's no longer single-family boarding house, and yes, it was rent control, and yes, it wasn't registered, and yes, she was in trouble, and yes, the tenants did not owe her any rent, and yes, all the rents the tenants had paid her, she owed them back. It was this poor rent control, I'm telling you, and it's a nightmare. And this poor woman, all she wanted to do was have some more company, provide housing. And now she's in trouble, and she's, the city's coming after her, and she's 72 years old. and all she's doing is renting rooms out. No, it's a boarding house now, so it's, it violates the zoning. It's you don't have a business license, LA City, it's a business, and oh, by the way, it's rent control, and you're in violation of Los Angeles Municipal Code rent control, and you're guilty of a misdemeanor, and, oh, this poor little woman, so that's, do not play with rent control. Okay, and so a single family, every word means something. You change a house into a rental, even a new roommate, got an argument there. Okay.
All right, no, I'm sorry, I gotta get you guys out of here. With that said, I'm gonna have to let Jim have the last word. I want to thank our panel, Brett, Michael, I hope this was helpful to you, a little more educational, a little more knowing how to kind of talk to your clients. And feel free to come up, get their cards, and keep in touch with them. And thank you so much. Bye.